Chapter 18. Memento Mori is the password. "Oh, you innocent lambs," Antonius groaned. "If only you knew what I've been through. It was crazy, just crazy." "What happened? Tell us, his friends yelled. Antonius burst out laughing. "I've come back from the jaws of hell," he said at last. "I should have been torn to shreds, but I've played a trick on them all." He laughed again and brandished the sword under Xantippus's nose. Xantippus drew back. "Put that sword away," he shouted. "Where is Mucius?" Antonius hurled the sword on the bed, tore off his helmet, and dropped onto an easy chair. Mucius took to the heels of the fat man. I followed the ex-gladiator, he panted. "Did you learn where he lives?" Julius asked. Antonius didn't reply. He stared a moment at his friends. Then he said soberly, "Tell me the truth. Has my hair turned white?" "Your hair is exactly what it's always been," Julius said, consolingly. "Just messier than usual," Publius added. "That's because my hair was standing on end in fright," Antonius retorted. "My knees are still shaking, too." "Pull yourself together," Xantippus said. "Where does the ex-gladiator live?" "He lives in the amphitheater," Antonius said, "way down below the arena in the catacombs." "That's a blow," Xantippus said, greatly disturbed. "I can't get down there to speak to him. They wouldn't allow me in." Antonius snorted. "You're right, Master Xanthus. It's worse than Hades. You might get in all right, but you'd never get out. Caius is in the catacombs too, locked in a cell." "Oh, how hideous!" Flavius cried. "I tried to free him, but I'm afraid I failed," Antonius said sadly. "How do you know he's jailed there?" Julius asked. "Because I saw him." "But how did you get into the catacombs?" said Publius. "Aren't they closely guarded at night?" Antonius smiled. "I heard the ex-gladiator give the password. The password is Memento Mori, a perfect password. I stood eye to eye with a horrible death." "Please tell everything calmly, Antonius, from the beginning," Xantippus said. "Why did Mucius go after the fat one, and you the ex-gladiator?" "It was this way," Antonius began explaining. He threw the net weighted with lead balls over a bust of Archimedes, which didn't exactly lift Xantippus's spirits, and then went on. "We followed them closely to just in front of the forum. They stopped in front of a tavern, and we hid behind a wine barrel to spy on them. If you don't find Udo and the letter before Paulino gets here, you're finished," the fat man said. "I'll find him soon enough, you can bet," the ex-gladiator said. Then they separated. "I must find out who the fat man is and where he lives," Mucius whispered to me. "He's one of the chief conspirators. You follow that other one." He disappeared into the darkness, and I crept along after the ex-gladiator. Surprisingly, he stopped at the amphitheater and knocked on a side door. I quickly threw myself into a niche in the wall. "The password?" somebody shouted behind the door. "Memento Mori," rasped the ex-gladiator. The guard let him in and closed the door. To be on the safe side, I stayed where I was a while longer. Then I knocked too. "The password?" a voice sounded again. "Memento Mori," I replied hoarsely. The door opened, and I shot past the guard and ran down into a deep tunnel. "Hey!" the guard shouted. But then I'd already dashed around a corner into a long hallway. Not a soul was in sight in any direction. I heard only muffled roars and, from somewhere, laughter. On my right were doorways leading into rooms, and on my left other doors fitted with peepholes and heavily bolted in front. I thought, those are cells for the prisoners. I bet the ex-gladiator has locked Caius in one of them. Maybe I can free him, and we can escape together. I crept from cell to cell, peering through the peepholes. In one I saw men lying on the floor moaning and crying. In another, people were on their knees mumbling prayers. I didn't see Caius among them, and I had to find him fast. I could hardly bear being in those catacombs any longer. Oh, friends, you can't imagine how grisly it was. The floor was slimy, and it stank. The walls were damp, and water dripped on my head from the ceiling constantly. Scraps of food lay everywhere, and mounds of bones, looking like human skeletons. Fat rats stared at me evilly. I threw a bone at one to chase it away. It was dark, too, with only a few scattering, flickering torches stuck in holders on the walls. "You were very brave," Flavius said, in admiration. "I'd have been afraid." Antonius shook again with laughter. "That wasn't anything yet, my friend," he said. "You'd have dropped dead with horror. I almost did, but I gave it to them, those devils. Ha ha ha!" "You can tell us later about your heroic exploits," Xanthippus said roughly. "Where did you finally discover Caius?" "In one of the cells. He was lying on the hard stones and sleeping. I looked at the cell number, number 13. 13, an unlucky number," Rufus exclaimed. "You're exactly right," said Antonius. "I was just about to shove back the bolt when in that instant I heard steps and saw 2 guards approaching on their rounds. I flew back to the tunnel I'd come from, but 2 gladiators appeared there. 'Oh, immortal gods,' I thought to myself, 'now it's getting hot. Where can I hide?' I flattened myself against a door. The men hadn't seen me yet, but they were coming closer and from both directions. 'Oh, Jupiter, please turn me into a rat,' I pleaded. Unfortunately, I remained what I was, abandoned by the gods." That's how Odysseus must have felt between Scylla and Charybdis. In desperation, I spun around, tore open the door behind me, stormed blindly into a room, and froze. I had stumbled into the gladiators' recreation room. I would have preferred leaping into the blazing crater of Vesuvius. "Why? Did they do something to you?" Flavius asked anxiously. Antonius laughed at him. "What do you think? That they kissed my feet? The whole bunch of them were drunk. Some, half naked, were rubbing themselves with oil, and others were drinking out of thick wineskins. Several were kneeling on the ground and tossing dice, and 3 or 4 close to a fire were turning half an oxen on a spit. It made me hungry to see it. 2 were fighting. One had a short sword, and the other just a net with lead balls in it. When they saw me, they all gaped, as at a messenger from the underworld. Suddenly a hand lifted me into the air by the collar, just as you'd grab a rabbit by the neck. 'Look what I've got,' he shouted. 'The kid is a spy,' another sputtered. 'He's here to poison us so that we'll lose the fight tomorrow against the Spanish dogs.' The fellow who had hold of me started shaking me. 'Is that right?' he asked. 'I swear I've never even heard of Spanish dogs,' I protested, and they all guffawed at that. 'He swears,' a giant bawled out, and leapt up on a table. He danced in a circle and snapped his fingers like a Spanish dancer. 'Search him,' a tall, thin man yelled, and the man who kept me dangling in the air reached his free hand into my coat pockets. 'No poison,' he yelled back in disappointment, 'only a piece of papyrus.' He dropped me and studied the papyrus. I held my breath. I had on Caius's cloak that Claudia had given me. What would Caius have written? I asked myself. Certainly it must have been something innocent and stupid, but I was very much mistaken. That piece of papyrus was my downfall. Antonius paused and looked at his friends with a crafty smile. The boys were spellbound. Even Xanthippus was impressed. "Why was it your downfall?" Rufus asked. "Everything in sequence," Antonius said. "On the papyrus were written the words, 'I, Caius, shall give no sassy answers in Xanthus' school.'" Antonius threw Xanthippus a mischievous look from the corner of his eye. "Ye gods," Xanthippus said, "that was the sentence I gave as punishment for Caius to write last winter. He was to take the sentence home and copy it perfectly for me 20 times. "I remember now, too," Publius chimed in. "He was angry about it on the way home from school and shoved the papyrus in his pocket rolled up into a little ball." "He should have eaten it instead," Antonius went on. "Caius, he's that lout who dumped a jug of honey over our good friend Gorgon's head," one of the gladiators snorted, bristling with rage. "Gorgon locked him up in here someplace," the thin one shouted. "The punk was trying to escape. It's a good thing we caught him. Several of these friendly fellows wanted to beat me black and blue. I've got a better idea," the giant shouted, and he jumped down from the table. "I think he was the ringleader of the bunch. Minomos," he cried, and all at once a dwarf appeared from a room next door. "A dwarf?" Flavius said in amazement. "Dwarves are often matched in the arena for the amusement of the crowd," Xanthippus interjected. "A disgusting spectacle. Go on, Antonius." The giant ordered the dwarf to go get a helmet and breast armor. Before I'd even had time to protest wildly that I wasn't Caius, they stuck a gag in my mouth, tore off the sandals I'd wrapped around my waist, put the helmet on me, and clamped the armor on my chest. They stuck the short two-edged sword in my hand and hung the casting net with the lead balls over my head. "Were you supposed to battle the dwarf?" Rufus asked. "You've got another guess coming, my friend. That would have been child's play compared to what they had in store. Just wait." They dragged me out to the corridor, pushed open a thick wooden door, shoved me inside, and slammed the door. I stumbled down 2 stone steps, tangling myself in the net, and fell on my face. I lay there for a while and didn't move. I expected something bad. I heard a vicious, muffled growling. I sat up, but slowly. First I spat out my gag, then I looked around. It was almost dark. Only 2 oil lamps were burning up near the ceiling. Again I heard growling, only this time more threatening, and cold chills ran along my back. I spotted caverns in the wall across me, with iron bars in front of them. Suddenly I knew where I was, and my heart sank. The roughnecks had tossed me into a den of wild animals. "Oh no!" cried Flavius, his eyes big as saucers. "Quiet, please," Rufus said hoarsely. They might want to just give me a good scare, I thought, but that was wishful thinking. In some secret way an iron grill was raised in front of one of the caverns, and a lion sprang out with one leap. He sat down across from me and stared. I was paralyzed. All I could feel was the hair standing on end under the helmet. Antonius paused and ran his hand over his hair, as though testing to see if it had since fallen into place again.